Okay, welcome everyone. My name is John Coonrod. I'm the coordinator for the Movement for Community-Led Development, and I really want to welcome everyone today to this program. Let me just give you our agenda for today. For those of you who are new to the movement, and I will give a brief introduction to the movement, and then we'll have our feature STAR program, which is the exciting results of the collaborative research that has been, we've all been waiting to hear, because this has been a massive effort by so many people around the world. And then we'll have some updates and from our teams and chapters and participants around the world. We'll talk about some of the upcoming advocacy moments and events that we're participating in, both globally and nationally, and then we'll talk about the next global meeting. The Movement for Community-Led Development was launched the same day and the same building where the Sustainable Development Goals were launched in 2015. At that meeting, it was pointed out by the Pope that it's all well and good that we should set goals and targets, but what will they mean for real people struggling to work themselves out of poverty? And from our perspective, what's missing is that people living in impoverished areas and impoverished countries lack their fundamental human right to have a fair share of public resources, a real voice in the decisions that affect their lives, and the power to really take effective charge of their own development. So that's what this movement is about. We have 5 goals: voice and agency for women, youth, and marginalized groups. Then ensuring that communities have a fair share of public resources, which we say is at least 20% of national budgets. Then good local governance, meaning participation, transparency, effectiveness of their local governments, quality public services, and the information, opportunity, and resources to really be resilient against shocks, because resilience is fundamentally a community level attribute. The front lines of this work are national chapters, because it's national government policies and action in each country that's really necessary to shift the power to communities. These green places have organized chapters, and the orange places are in formation, or there's just a lot of participants participating with us individually from those areas. Our theory of change is that there's basically 2 major thrusts of work. The formation of advocacy partnerships to really advocate with national governments to decentralize and devolve resources, and then partnerships to facilitate community-led development at larger and larger scales. And we're going for a convergence, because we see that only by having real national support for community-led development and nationwide mobilization can we achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. So what we'll hear about today is a very important part of the fuel for both of these tracks, and that's the evidence. What have we learned about community-led development? What can we say to finance ministers of why they should shift serious parts of their national budgets to local communities? We have a newsletter that goes out to about 6,000 practitioners and policymakers beyond those people that are active in the movement. We've had a lot of action around the Food System Summit. We'll discuss that a little later. But right now, I am going to stop sharing my slides, and I'm going to hand this meeting over to my colleague, Gunjan Veda, to give us, to facilitate the presentation on the research.
Thank you, John. I hope everybody can see my screen.
It's not presenting yet. It's just,
Oh, okay.
now it is.
Okay, perfect. So thank you for those of you who've been on our calls over the last couple of years. You've heard me at multiple points during these 2 years, 2.5 years now, talk about the collaborative research and the work that we are doing. So I'm very excited that our team is now sharing with you the results from phase 2. I am actually going to just introduce the team and what we're going to be doing today, and then they're going to take us through what we found out. So we have with us today from the collaborative research team, Molly Wright from PAC, Paul Tatransipalli from World Vision International, Elaine Fluta from Outreach International, and Diana Delgadillo from THP Mexico. There were other members of the team who weren't able to join us, but you will see them as we go through the presentation. So Molly, without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Gunjan. So before we jump in, I need to inform you that this research that we'll be sharing today has been made possible by a grant from the Implementer-Led Design, Evidence Analysis and Learning IDEAL activity. The IDEAL Small Grants Program is made possible by the generous support and contribution of the American people through the United States Agency for International Development. Next slide, please. So as many of you know, and as Gunjan just noted, we started our collaborative research journey back in 2019. And in that first phase, we together examined what exactly is community-led development, and what are organizations doing when they say they're doing CLD. Through this exploration, we collectively developed 2 tools aimed at improving our common understanding of and our practice of CLD. The first one, this was the Cld Assessment Tool, and the second, a quality appraisal tool for CLD evaluations. We launched the report and the tools in phase 1 of this research in January, and in a moment I'll share some success stories that we've already seen from this. What we're focusing on sharing today are the findings from phase 2 of the research. And in this phase, we shifted our focus to looking at impact in CLD programming by conducting a rapid realist review. This phase of the project, aptly named Include, or Impact of Community-Led Development on Food Security, began in September of last year. And it was conducted in very close partnership with a group of experts from Charles Darwin University in Australia, who are world-renowned for their work on realist approaches. As noted, this project was funded by the IDEAL Small Grants Program. Next slide, please. Okay, thanks. So quickly, before we dig into the methods and the findings of the realist review, we do have some success stories or successful news from phase 1 of our research to share. The tools that we developed are currently being used all over the world. They've been downloaded in over 70 countries. And although we don't yet know exactly how many organizations are actively using the tools, our phase 3 of this work, we will track utilization of the tools and begin to examine if our practice of CLD is indeed changing. For now, the movement has introduced 4-hour certificate courses on the Cld Assessment Tool based on the demand of not just our members here, but also many other organizations globally. So far, we've conducted the trainings in English and French in a number of countries, and Spanish training is also coming soon. So if you want to learn more about the tools or participate in a training, you can do so for free by registering on the MCLD website. Next slide, please. Okay, so coming back to the main purpose of our discussion today, which is the research team's rapid realist review. A realist review, is a type of systematic review of similar programs or families of programs rather than discrete interventions. And they focus on how outcomes are created and why they vary across contexts. So a rapid realist review, not surprisingly, is then a short form of realist review with a very specific focus and a targeted purpose. For this particular study, our research question was, how and in what context do key aspects of CLD, particularly leadership and facilitation, contribute to resilience and equity in relation to food security? So we chose these two focal areas, facilitation and community leadership, because phase one of our research identified those two as being really foundational and critical for CLD work. So in this study, the team reviewed 117 documents representing 56 programs. 93 were from MCLD member organizations and 24 from the Food for Peace program. In keeping with the protocol for a rapid realist review, we created an expert group and a reference group of practitioners to act as a sounding board for the study and ensure that the final conceptual model reflects realities on the ground. In addition to the final report, we have produced 2 guidance documents for funders and implementing organizations, which will be available in both English and French. Next slide, please. Okay, so at this time, we do want to present to you the team behind the study. As you can see, this was a multi-organizational team, and our reference and expert group members were from all over the world and included professionals from USAID. And Gunjan has already noted the organizations we all represent. So now I'm going to hand it over to Holte to discuss methods and key findings.
Thank you, Molly. We can summarize the methodology followed along these 9 steps. The first step was to identify the review question. As mentioned earlier, we did this based on the findings from phase 1 of our research and the funding application guidelines. Next, we identified key terms like CLD, facilitation, leadership, equity. We developed an initial rough theory of how facilitation and community leadership may increase equity, resilience, and food security outcome. Then we searched for primary studies, utilizing studies already provided by MCLD members for the research and the legacy Food for Peace evaluations from the Development Expertise Clearinghouse. Our inclusion and exclusion criteria included key terms and prioritized rich qualitative data. It focused on programs, not on reports. We conducted the quality appraisal as part of the data extraction. After data extraction and synthesis using Max QDA, we conducted a workshop with select participants to understand the implications of our findings and the key recommendations emerging from them. These results are the products that Molly mentioned, the guidance documents. Next slide, please. Before we go over the findings, we wanted to highlight how one should interpret results from a realist review, since this might be something new for new terminology for all of us and new methodology. In realist review, data is extracted to test theory, not to amalgate findings. As a result, the findings show how CLD can work, not how it always works, and not how it works on average. The findings also provide evidence about the conditions in which CLD is more likely and less likely to work. Also, it's essential to remember that a combination of causes is required for any outcome, and the presence or absence of a single factor rarely accounts for change. Next slide, please. In addition, we wanted to mention that as with any research or evaluation, there are limitations to consider along with the findings. In this case, there was a wide range of programs described as CLD, yet there was minimal description on how these programs carried out CLD and what facilitation and leadership looked like. Often programs used multiple terms to describe the same function. For example, mobilizer, animator, facilitator, volunteer, or sometimes the same term to describe different functions. For example, the term facilitator was used to describe many roles, including purely training or organizational roles. As a result of all this, it was tough to distinguish between community leadership and facilitation in programs. The nature of evaluation reports was a limitation in itself, as was the fact that few reports described context and factors affecting their programs. Next slide, please. Okay, we thought this would be important to bring back into the participants' mind. As we saw in the previous steps, we began by developing key definitions for our terms. And I'll actually not read all of this. I'll leave this slide up for a little bit and let you read these definitions. The detailed definitions will be in the guidance documents. I counted that we actually needed a whole minute to read, but I'm being impatient to read the whole minute.
Should I move ahead?
Okay.
Do people still need to read?
Gunjan, feel free to move to the next slide when you think it's time.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to make sure people read because everything you say and we say will be in the context of these definitions.
Right.
Okay, here we go.
Okay, so of course the big reveal is, what did we find? We have grouped our findings under 12 key themes, which we have listed here. We don't have the time in the time span of this meeting to delve into all of them. Therefore, we'll quickly give you an overview of them, and then we'll delve in just a few before we move to recommendations. The ones that we'll delve in are the tiles that are in blue. So the critical thing to remember here is that all findings refer to the literature reviewed and show how CLD can work, not how it always works. This is something we want to re-emphasize. Our first finding comes to no surprise. Context matters. We are able to identify environments that enable and limit community-led development. For example, the presence of local community-based organizations and supportive governments are considered enablers. The second finding is that much of our current work, at least as described in the reports, falls short of the CLD practice. In the study, we identified 7 types of CLD activities, and only 20% of the programs, roughly about 11, included collective or group leadership, where community or community groups carried out needs identification and goal setting, or where there was a high level of dialogue and collaboration, and where community members initiated and completed projects. That's, again, that's about 20% of the sample. Third, we have been saying this for a while, but the study generated the evidence to show that facilitation and leadership need explicit attention and resourcing. Training, ongoing support, remuneration, recognition are all important for facilitators. The fourth finding came also out in phase 1 of our study. Programming duration matters. Generally speaking, the longer is better, but we also need to be careful here about creating dependency. The next one talks about 5 forms of social capital that are necessary for community-led development in food security. At the same time, we found evidence that CLD can contribute to resilience by building human and social capital. On the equity front, we saw with phase 1, as we saw with phase 1, there remains work to be done. And there is a lot of material that we'll share with you today in the following slide. We also found evidence that multi-sectoral approaches contribute to food security, formalized structure support for CLD, and that structured advocacy processes increase communities' power and make governments more receptive to their demands. Finally, the sector needs precise or clearer terminology crisper program theory, and more robust evaluations. We need to rethink the way we evaluate our work because of everything that we mentioned, of what we were able to detect on the current evaluations. Thank you.
Thanks, Holta. I can take it from here. As Holta shared, we don't have time to go into all 12 of those findings. So let's just dig into a couple of them, and I will start with key finding number 1. As Holta mentioned earlier, we saw that local CDOs and supportive governments are essential to CLD in that they enable the CLD process. On the other hand, low access to resources, low social capital, and high barriers to participation can then also limit CLD on the flip side of that. Next slide, please, Kunja. So here is a more detailed look at factors that enable CLD and then also how. We see them on the slide. Some of those enabling contexts include supportive and effective transparency and transparent policies, programs that align with government goals, the existence of local and relevant CEOs, social capital, as Kunjan also mentioned earlier, accessible funding, and then synergies as far as program leverages are concerned. And how it all fits together is, for example, when there are resources to enable effective implementation of programs, and there's existing social, human, financial, material, and also environmental capitals, they can contribute to trust and then also perceived legitimacy of the work. And this in turn contributes to participation and achievement of outcomes. Now, once that happens, you actually see results from all of this working together. This further builds their motivation and also increases stock on existing capitals. And with appropriate leadership, all of this is then reinvested back into community development to keep the development of that going. Next slide, please, Kunja. Then, of course, on the flip side of that, we also see contexts that are not that supportive. And this is poor infrastructure, local government support that's not adequate, and also personnel that's not adequate. And in other words, there is a low state capacity, which in turn reduces access to resources and therefore the capacity for people to actually participate in CLD. Similarly, this in fragile contexts, and when there are high barriers to participation, there's less likeliness that CLD structures can be formalized, which in turn reduces the effectiveness of community development going forward. The next finding that we will dig into is key finding number 4. On the program design and implementation, we found that while quick wins may improve community motivation and participation, you see results and are inspired then to work together even more, they might not be sustainable. We saw that short-term programs are less likely to contribute to attitudinal shifts, and locations far away from program centers benefit less from CLD programs. Collaboration, in turn, with local CEOs, other nonprofits in the areas, and then also governments is effective, but it does require investment. There was also some evidence to suggest that projects that build human and social capital were more likely to lead to community-led and collective outcomes than just infrastructure projects. But that is something that we need to look into a little bit more in the future. And that's point number 2 here on this slide. Next slide, thank you, Kunja. Let's look at key finding number 6. The most disturbing, and though perhaps not surprising finding, was that we needed to build equity in our CLD work. Even though programs identified many marginal and vulnerable groups, we only found evidence with respect to women and youth. And again, we all know that women is not a homogeneous group, right? And the same can be said for youth. We did not find evidence that we are reaching the most vulnerable women, nor the most vulnerable youth. This is something we also see in the broader study that we did when we scoped 173 programs in the first step of the collaborative research. Part of this could be also, part of this could be about how we do CLD and how it relies on investment in time resources from community. The most vulnerable of the communities that we want to work with are most often also poor as far as time and resources are concerned. That said, and this correlates somewhat with the previous findings that I shared with you, where laws, policies are supportive, gender equity was actively pursued. Skilled facilitation challenged gender inequality, women developed confidence and voice, and we included in the decision-making process. Next slide.
Eileen, you're muted. Sorry.
On this slide, you can see some examples on findings with regard to women and equity. The program theory, which you see here in the middle of the slide, reads as follows. Women develop confidence and voice, and women's voices are included in decision-making. Women develop a wide range of roles at home and in the community, including increased capacity to earn and control income. This happens when laws and policies require equitable inclusion, where there's capacity development on these laws and policies, where women undergo capacity strengthening to participate in group activities, where there's skilled facilitation to challenge power inequalities, and this is but to name just a few of those enablers. However, this might not happen in places where gender equity is seen as a perceived norm, where cultural norms preclude women speaking in front of men, for example, and where marginalized women are not included. Okay, I'm going to hand it over to Diana.
Thank you, Lynn, and let's keep seeing these key findings. So in key findings 7, we have already talked about the different forms of capital, starting with social capital. And this is an enabling condition for CLD. But what the review shows is that CLD can increase the resilience of communities by building capacities, increasing social capital and social cohesion, and developing a self-reliance mindset. So what does this mean, and what are the facilitating and limiting factors? Yes, so here's an example of the program's theory for self-reliance and the enabling and limiting factors. Mindset shift, community-led collective action, and common goals increase collective efficacy, passion for change, and continuous learning leading to self-reliance. Local leaders catalyze community participation, and this is in the middle of the slide. So this happens when organizations build on their strengths, where the group structures that have been created for the CLD are inclusive and not captured by elite groups or a few select individuals. Existing solidarity and social capital also enable the process. And if we look at the right of the limiting factors, we see that the opposite is true. And then we see corruption captured by elites, failure to implement inequitable participation, and some others. Next slide, please. Yeah, so now regarding social cohesion, elements were identified to affirm that collaboration in a common cause and or spaces for positive interaction between groups lead to an increase in bonding, bridging, and linking social capital. This increase in social capital and social cohesion increases access to resources and supports, which increases resilience. However, this is limited in contexts where there is social pressure and people participate more out of fear of reprisals than because they wish to do so. This increase in resilience is also limited by exclusion and inaccessibility resulting from distance or poverty. Next slide, please. So in key finding 8, given that this research is framed in the context of food security, let's see what we found in this regard. So it was very clear to see that using multisectorial approaches contributes to food security outcomes. This led us to think about the relevance of including functional literacy components in programs that focus on that topic on food security. So we also found that all of the programs that demonstrated community food security outcomes had intermediate equity and resilient outcomes. So all three are connected, but and all of these programs were multisectorial. Next slide, please. Here we have some, we show that increased knowledge and skills in agriculture, along with social and conflict resolution skills to solve land-related problems, contribute to agricultural productivity. Collective actions enable access to food in times of scarcity. And this occurs when, in addition to developing collective action and agricultural production skills, conflict resolution training is also provided. We found evidence of at least 2 factors that can limit this access to food and increase agricultural productivity. The first one is when there is no direct assistance to address immediate food shortages. And the second one is when local trainers do not have the skills needed to solve agricultural productivity problems. Next slide. Communities where there are high levels of bonding capital and where there are collective assets and structures such as saving groups, for example, that have higher levels of access to resources contribute to resilience. This access to resources is facilitated by collective action, but also by peer learning, as well as personal support. And we see that this builds confidence and capacity to recover from crises or shocks. And next slide, please. There are here we have 2 more examples. Family nutrition is impacted by increased knowledge and skills, as well as improved economic capacity. This occurs when the program facilitated capacity building in health, nutrition, life skills, savings, and income generating activities, particularly focused on mothers. But the limiting circumstances was that women participated mostly as volunteers. And this could demotivate group leaders and reduce opportunities for other income generating activities, limiting their economic empowerment. Next slide, please. We also found evidence that increased knowledge and skills combined with access to resources improves women agricultural productivity, which contributes to improved nutrition. But this was constrained by illiteracy, particularly in poorer households. Next one, please. Finally, on this, the last finding that we want to share today, we found evidence that formalized structure supports CLD, and also the structure advocacy processes increase the power of communities. Here we look at formalized structures as this can be structured to ensure an inclusive, transparent, and accountable process. At the same time, they create legitimacy and tend to be viewed more positively by authorities, by governments, representatives, etc. They are more likely to listen they are more likely to listen and to engage with those representing formal groups. However, we also found that there were barriers to participation in these formal structures. For example, illiteracy, as we mentioned before. And this was because people who could not do the necessary administrative work, which was further exacerbated by the high turnover of volunteers, for example. So once again, time as a resource, it was something that mattered. Next slide, please. Above is, well, here's the last piece of program theory that we're going to share today. And formalized structures, as we mentioned, allow for governance of community-led development, allow for consultation process with the broader community, as well as official engagement with local government and external agencies. This also allows for transparency and accountability to the wider community. Formalized groups are more likely to be viewed positively by authority holders. This occurs when group members are elected by communities and they are not from outside. And this is it also occurs when there is clarity in the roles and procedures, because as we know, a structure itself is not enough, and when the members of the group have timely advice and support. So as we have seen before, it is limited by illiteracy or literacy levels and volunteer turnover. So this is it for the part of the key findings. So now I turn to Gunjan for see what all this means for us as implementing organizations, but also to funders.
Thank you so much, Diana, and the whole team for sharing out the most interesting part, which has been what did we find and how did we make those findings? But now we want to look a little bit at what does it mean, like Diana said, for us in our practice. You know, what does it mean for us? What does it mean for the people who fund our programs, the organizations who fund our programs? So as Molly mentioned in the beginning, that we have actually two guidance documents that we have prepared, one for implementing organizations and one for funders. And both of these are going to be available soon. And in these guidance documents, we have, we have summarized the findings and the implications and recommendations. But what we're going to do today is just take up 6 of these key recommendations, which can actually, they work for both for funders and for implementing organizations. So the first top recommendation, and really, if you've been listening to us talk about the research, this shouldn't be a surprise, is that we need to rethink the way we do our evaluations. This came out in the first phase of our research. It's come out very, very strongly in the second phase of our research as well. The purpose and the methods of how we do our evaluations and to what end need to be negotiated, not just between funders and implementing organizations, but with communities. Because if communities have to lead programs, if they have to implement programs, it's important to understand what information they need in order to do so. So communities have to be part of that conversation. In addition to that, we found this time and again that our evaluations are not looking at attributes of community-led development, at characteristics of CLD, at what makes a program CLD. And we have to evaluate for that if we have to talk about the impact of CLD or if we want to understand how community-led development works. And finally, the equity dimension. It seems like a given disaggregation of findings, and yet it is not. So we really need to ensure that our evaluations are looking at equity, are looking at marginalized groups. And we have a handy tool for doing that in the movement, the Quality Appraisal Tool for CLD evaluations. It's a simple 13-question Excel-based tool. My colleague Sarah will probably put a link in the chat box. But a very good starting point to think about how we are doing evaluations of CLD programs. Second recommendations is really that we need to change the way we practice CLD. And this starts with the way RFPs or requests for proposals are issued, as well as how we respond to them. The RFPs have to clearly specify, it's not enough to say sustainability or resilience or equity or community leadership. We all mean different things with these terms, and both the RFPs as well as our responses to them have to clearly outline what we mean when we are saying this. We have to say, if our programs are community-led, we have to describe in our response to proposals, in our program descriptions, in our evaluations, how these programs are community-led. What is making them community-led? What is the role of the facilitator? How is community leadership built in? We need to not just specify our theory of change. We actually need to show and evaluate for our theory of change. And finally, the political and social context. We all know that that is the key for CLD. We've seen context matters. We need to have detailed political and social context analysis. And this is not just about strengths and weaknesses or if there is conflict or not. This is about looking at the intersectionalities, about the vulnerabilities, about the marginalizations that exist in a society. And we know that this requires time and resources, which means that this needs to be built into grants, into preparatory phase for looking at social and political context analysis, and marginalizations needs to be built into grants. We heard how formalization of CLD structures strengthens CLD. So our grants and our programs need to actively plan for and build this into our work. But again, we have to be careful that we are not imposing these structures. We are not creating new external structures for CLD. These structures have to be created by the community and they have to be inclusive. We have a CLD assessment tool that Molly talked about earlier that most of you should know about. It's being used all over the world by different organizations. And we talk about some of these points there. So actually that's a good starting point to see how do we make our programs community-led? How do we build in formalization? And how do we work with local governments, which is our next recommendation? Because we've clearly found that that is an enabling and important context for doing this work. We have to ensure appropriate workloads, remuneration, training, and ongoing support for facilitators. I know we've said this time and again, but it cannot be overemphasized because the evidence clearly points to the need for that. And finally, Elaine talked about the equity concerns. Participation, inclusion, equity, these are the foundational principles of community-led development. But if we really want to operationalize them, if we really want to ensure sustainability, then we have to make sure that our programs operate in a manner that allows women, that allows the most marginalized women, the most marginalized groups in society to be a part of these programs. It's important their voice is part of the decision-making process, but what does that mean? How much of an additional burden is there on them to do so? We just had the WASH sector dialogue last week, and John Oldfield from Global Watch 2020 made a very interesting observation. He said, I get paid to do advocacy on WASH. That's my job, right? Advocacy on WASH, and I'm paid for it. And yet we want community members to become advocates for WASH and do that job free of cost. If we are truly valuing them at par, then why is there this discrepancy? And these are questions we need to think about, because that's the only path towards not just sustainability, but inclusion and equity, which are so important to us. So we will be putting up the guidance documents on our website for you to review and see soon. The report is going to be out soon. But for now, we did want to, this is the first time we are sharing findings from the report, and we obviously wanted to make sure that our community, our movement, is the first group of people who we share this out with. If you have questions, comments, feedback, anything that resonates with you, anything that you're curious about, please feel free to ask us. The team will try to answer to the extent that we can right now. Thank you. And I haven't had a chance to look at chat, so I'm going to stop share so that I can.
I've been looking at the chat. This is Anne. First off, thanks for that incredible presentation. That's the first time I've seen all of that together, and it's going to take me a year to be able to work through all the really helpful implications, because I think it just puts in a very systematic way a lot of things that we've all seen or experienced, but not had put together so systematically and methodically. Based on that incredible amount of research, I know how many, speaking of compensation for time, hours you all have been spending, because I know that realist review process is a bear and it's a lot of work. But now I see like the results that it yields are just so different than you get from other methods. I did want to call see Brenda has put a question in the chat, and Brenda, I wonder if you want to unmute yourself and ask your question, or would you like me to read it?
I'm okay with you asking the questions.
Okay, thanks, Brenda. So
Thanks.
Brenda types, did you find differentiation in success between community-led development focused on one issue or SDG goal versus movements focused more broadly on multiple issues and opportunities that are determined by community residents? In other words, a more comprehensive community or neighborhood approach versus collective impact that focuses on one issue? Great question.
Thanks, Brenda. Does anyone from the team want to answer that, or should I attempt to answer it?
Maybe just to say, you can fill it in, Gunjan. One of the limitations that we said is that this had like the whole review had a skew towards reviewing programs that were food security related. So some of those, like even the sector was more like geared towards a couple of particular maybe SDGs if there was a link. We didn't necessarily map the programs against SDGs beyond just the general concept of like it's on the food security and what they are doing. So there wasn't that kind of nuancing or dissecting of the data the way that you are asking, even though that would be like a very interesting way to look at. Gunjan, I do not know how to best answer it because we didn't necessarily look at it that way.
Yeah. So absolutely, we did not. But what we did find, Brenda, was that, there was definite and clear evidence to show that wherever we found resilience outcomes. So as Holta said, take it that we were looking at it in the context of programs that did have food security, but we did look at multi-sectoral and integrated programs as well. What we did not look at was specific sectoral programs that may be looking at sectors other than food security and what were not multi-sectoral, right? And what we found very clear evidence of was that all programs that showed outcomes for resilience, equity, and food security were multi-sectoral. What does this mean? It needs to be unpacked more because we did not really do the comparison like Holta stated. That wasn't in our scope.
I just put a note to Jeffrey Ash. Jeffrey, would you like to unmute? You've had several really interesting comments and questions, and I wonder if you wanted to share those with the group. Here he comes.
Unmute.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, here I am. Yes. Thank you. Well, I've a very interesting challenge, very interesting research and great observations, and the kind of things I've seen the great challenges that so many NGOs face is that they don't really build on what people are already doing. And this is particularly in the case of in my field of savings groups. And you consider if we went in and found out more what the Roscos were already doing, all of these, and presented them with a challenge of and recognition and a bit of help to go out and train more groups instead of bringing in our methodology, I think we could achieve a lot more at a fraction of the cost. So I think this is one of the key challenges is that not coming with our solutions, but find out what people are already doing and why they're doing it, and then asking them the questions of how they would solve the problem, and then listening to them, and then building a program around their solutions. And it sounds very easy, but as for 40 years, I came in with microfinance and I knew the solution and I just created institutions about them. I introduced savings group methodology that we developed from around the world. We introduced it, jammed it down, but we never really seriously looked at what's already going on and what the people's thoughts might be. And amazing enough, when we came back a year or so later, or 2 years later, we found that people had really thrown out most of the stuff we introduced, brought in the systems they were already using, and were amazingly innovative and creative. So I think we shouldn't, that's my basic point these days, is the wisdom of the community and us being not trainers, but activist anthropologists who go out and see what's going on, learn from that, ask questions, build around what people are already doing, encourage them, provide them a tiny bit of support to get together, talk to each other, listen to them, monitor, and so kind of flip the usual paradigm. So I'll leave it at that. That's my rant for the day.
Thank you. That was actually a great, that was a great summary of what we were trying. We found through the evidence, but absolutely appreciate your making that point.
Sure.
I see Isabella has her hand up.
Okay, go ahead, Isabella, and then I'll read a comment from Aisha, and there's another question from Brenda.
Yes, good morning. Thanks. It's very, it's incredible findings that can really help a lot. So I work for a small NGO, and I was wondering which sort of donors would be interested in funding this type of project? Because right now, like all the donors, I mean, not right now, but forever, are looking for very quick outcomes and all. And with SDG 17, what sort of partnerships would an NGO, according to you, would have to have, not only with the academia, but maybe even with the private sector? And then what values would not be in common, right? Would conflict, voila. So yeah, so it's a bit the donors, the types of partnerships, and if there is a private sector to be involved with SDG 17, how would that, do you have any findings in relationship to that?
So what we found was that partnerships and collaboration are effective, right? We did find evidence of that. Now, we did not delve into specifics like, okay, partnership with the private sector, or how that would work. What we were looking for, the way a realist evaluation works is that we have a program theory. So we say based on how programs are being run, that this is how we anticipate, this is how we think is going to happen when community leadership and facilitation take part in communities in this manner. These are the different pathways. This is how we think we will get to the outcomes, right? And then we see if there is evidence to see that. So collaboration was one of our steps, and we definitely found evidence that collaboration, especially when it comes to government or with existing community organizations and networks, is effective. Private sector was something we did not specifically look into at all. So from the research point of view, no, there is nothing I can specifically say about that. I think just from a movement perspective in general, I do want to say, however, so the caveat being this, I'm not saying this now from the research, and I'm not saying this from the evidence from the study, is that actually I think donors are now increasingly at least beginning to, especially with the pandemic and stuff, beginning to understand the need for locally led development or community led development. There is greater appetite for it, out of necessity perhaps, but there is. And that's where we think that networks like the movement, like when we have the national chapters for the movement, are effective ways of reaching out, because what we did find was, and I think the relevant finding for us here is the structured advocacy processes. So when we collaborate and we have a structured advocacy process, it's found to be more effective because there is greater legitimacy, because they see strength in the numbers, right? They see it's not one small organization in one small area saying this, but it's a whole group of organizations who are working in a whole group of areas who are working around this and who believe in this, right? And that, I think, has an impact. I don't know if anyone from the team again wants to step in.
Okay, so I call everyone's attention to a lot of amazing comments in the chat, which we will save. Thank you for everybody who is putting content in there. Spotlight on Aisha from our Nigeria chapter, who comments that communities, if well engaged, will really have the urge to do even much more than we think. But we have to give some kind of guidance so that they can take the driver's seat. So that's in line with a lot of the sort of comments we heard. A little targeted technical support on demand and recognition and solidarity goes a long way. And that's, you know, what Jeffrey was saying as well. And then I want to go up to a question that, oh, Brenda, sorry, I missed your earlier question. Brenda asks, was there evidence demonstrating the importance of 1, tapping the wisdom of citizens, and 2, empowering them to make decisions?
So we looked at facilitation and community leadership, and the way we looked at community leadership and facilitation was in the context of citizens making decisions. The challenge, of course, was that, as we said in the evidence, only 20% of the programs that we looked at actually did that. And so that's been one of the challenges. But yes, so I would say yes, the whole research was actually looking at the impact of communities, of community leadership and facilitation. And the way we looked at community leadership was communities taking decision. And for us, facilitation was the process of that decision making happening, right? Of facilitating that process of community decision making. So yes, whatever evidence that we have talked about is in that context. I realize we are approaching the top of the hour and that we do have updates from different national chapters and as well as on other parts of the movement's work. I see a lot of comments and questions in the chat. So I want to suggest that unless somebody has a burning question or comment, we can try and respond to this in the chat, but I want to be cognizant of the time that the national chapters would need to also share what the work that they are doing. So yeah, unless somebody has any burning question or whatever, maybe we can hand it back to John.
I just want to say that Jude is trying to connect. I have to go get my phone, so I will be leaving for just a minute.
So, but did you notice that the entire chapter in Liberia is together participating in this event? I just think that's awesome. You know, we see the whole, so hello everybody in Liberia.
Can we
look,
pin, oh, I see. Okay, yes, I'm gonna pin that screen.
A whole room full of people there. So I'm glad that they have reached a level of COVID safety where they can do that. I hope everyone is keeping safe and healthy. But let me just, as we start to turn to hear from our chapters around the world, I think please give some thought. I want to call on Steve, if you're willing to just share what's happening tomorrow in Kenya, if you can unmute. Doesn't look like your sound's connected. Well, maybe I won't go to Steve. So
maybe I can give a little context about Liberia, because I'm not sure if they can unmute either.
Okay.
Okay, so the Liberia chapter was self-organized, self-formed group of 10 CSOs from the settlement. Oh, can you speak, Jude? Can we hear you?
Yes, they're unmuted.
Okay, go ahead.
These 3 topics, we firstly look at community survey. For community survey, we keep the fund survey, from fund survey, we keep down to soil testing. And you see my process will be reading and we'll be doing the breakdown of everything that's been written here for the flip sheets. Yeah, you can start reading, my daughter. Yes. What are we talking about? When it is survey is to go somewhere to see and observe the thing that there, why it's good for you or it's not good for you. So before, as a farmer, you do farm anywhere, you want to go to one of town community, they say like and you say somebody else is going to argue. So yourself is going to see what the people need or how the people living and what are those things that you want to do in that place. So you start going to see what the people need and what do you want. That's how you go to observe.
Wonderful, Jim.
Yes. If you go in a community that you go in the town, you first go to ask for the town chief. Because sometimes this place you are staying there and you want to be a farm there. So you will be able to go and ask the town chief. The town chief will be able to show you the bad side of the town or the good side of the town. Or sometimes in certain community, certain things that they can do there. Right? And you go as a senior to tell you that this, you can be able to do in this town. And the town chief will also invite the elders of the town, show you to them, and the elder will be able to know you, and they will be able to tell you the good side of the town and the bad side of the town.
Okay, Jude, Jude, hi. Your sound is not coming. Your sound is not coming through clearly, but we definitely experience the energy of the group there and their intention. So congratulations on your gathering and your new initiatives.
Yes, and we look forward to the report and learning more, and we're just really excited for you all. So thank you so much for joining us, and I love your MCLD mask. That's the first one I've ever seen.
Well, we should produce them. Okay.
Thank you so much, Jude.
Yeah. So sorry, we're not able to understand the sound. So, but we look forward, and we'll share any written report you send with everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Okay. So, any other chapter want to give an update on your activities locally?
Once you go and play with me, according to how the people will help show you in the town, when you play with me, you'll be fine.
I'm sorry, Jude. We really can't. There's something wrong with your connection that doesn't allow the sound to come through clearly at all. So, but we're sorry we're not able to understand your voice, but we love seeing the pictures. Steve, do you want to go ahead from Kenya?
Yeah, sure, John. And it's good to see you after such a long time. And thanks for that great presentation by Diana. So from Kenya, I think we are really progressing well in terms of strengthening the movement here. We have our monthly call tomorrow. And tomorrow we are having Makueni County government that will be sharing, their experience in terms of the utilization of the CLD model to deepen to deepen development from the grassroots level, and also sharing some lessons learned along the way and how best those can be scaled by other counties across the country. So I think it's going to be a really exciting session. Makueni has been one of the shining stars when it comes to CLD model. And so it will be exciting to have you all join us tomorrow from 2:30 to 3:30 the East African time. I think that's the only key update from our end.
Wonderful, Steve. Thank you. Other news from other chapters? Anyone?
Yeah. Hi, John.
Hi,
Again.
Diana.
I just wanted to share that last week we launched the self-assessment tool, the version in Spanish. So we have there Marta Cruz, who's part of the scoping group of the whole research. And we also have someone from the National Council for Evaluating Social Policy in Mexico. And we've been having a lot of responses around and a lot of interest around the tool. So we're developing our strategy for following up all those manifestation of interest. And basically, it's not only, the good part is not only interested by organizations, but also for governments, for national governments and subnational governments on how to use this tool. And we know that we have to make some adjustments, but it's really, it's been really interesting, the process around the tool and everything that came up about that.
Very good. That's great to hear. Other chapter news. I saw Pascal was on. I don't know, we have a fair number of Zambians on the line. Any other chapter updates?
Gertrude, do you want to give one for Malawi, or I can, just on the concept note that's in development?
You can go ahead, and thanks.
Oh, thanks. So the Malawi chapter is in the process of developing their concept note for their small grant, and they've identified the group wants to work on the fact that there are devolved government structures, local government structures, committees, and professionals and so forth that are in place, but they're not really functioning in the way that they're supposed to. They're not connecting with communities, and the people who are filling those various roles, local government roles, just don't know about their roles and responsibilities. They've never been oriented to them, and the communities don't know about them at all. So they're in a case where they have the structures in place, but the structures are not functioning. So they want to work together as a chapter to create a package, a response that would enable the different stakeholders in the local situation to be able to mobilize, to work together, to communicate, and for the local government to fulfill the roles it's supposed to fill in partnership with the community and under the watch of the community. So it's a great concept note. It's almost done, and it's going to really present some innovative work in Malawi that has big implications for scaling up in the future. I'll say that about Malawi. And Pascal, I'm not sure if you want to give an update from Benin or West Africa.
Looks like yes, Pascal, there you are. You're muted.
Yes, I'm here.
Good. Now we hear you.
Yes. Related to what we have just heard from the team, collaborative team, yesterday we met at the leadership team of the chapter, MCLD Benin chapter, and we would like to stimulate a reflection in community, to identify where need is to shift the paradigm to support the effectiveness of the CLD practices in communities. And we'll be developing 2-page to start that reflection in communities, and we could share more in the call with other chapters. Thank you.
Wonderful. Pascal.
Just to mention that we have other points, but just to mention this is very new. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. And I saw Joanna was on earlier from Uganda. I don't know if she's still here. There No, don't see Uganda. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen again. Chrome tab, and we'll go through some upcoming adventures that we'll all be having. So let me also make sure my camera's still on. Okay, so the Food Systems Summit is finally been scheduled. They're calling it a People Summit. We'll see if we can make it people-ish. That's been our big quest throughout this entire Food Systems Summit process, and I'm sure it will go beyond. But this is it will be the 23rd of September. So between now and then, there will be opportunities for us to speak to our governments. For example, the US government is having a session in September to listen to us, to listen to civil society. And I think there's probably other governments that will be doing the same. So I don't know that there'll be much chance for our voices to be heard on the 23rd itself at the summit. But between now and then, we should certainly do everything we can to make sure that our point on the importance of all the things you just heard from this research, this research is completing with a focus on food security at a very good time to hopefully influence this summit. So that's one step that we want to take. So the UN General Assembly is starting in 3 weeks. Your governments will be participating there as well. That may be an opportunity. One important date for us is Democracy Day, which is coming up on September 15th. And that's an opportunity for us to stress the importance of governments listening to their people, which was another big finding that came out of the research. Then we're heading into a lot of events. The Girl Child Day event, the World Food Day, the World Day for the Elimination of Poverty will all come up in October. So we want to really prepare some materials during September for us to push out about those days. And during our September meeting, we'll be able to discuss that. The Climate Change Summit is coming up. I've already heard from a number of member organizations that will be speaking there, but this will be a big push for us because community-led action for both climate change adaptation and mitigation is going to be extremely important. And so that will be a big issue for us to all bring our experience about as we move forward towards November. Then the Nutrition for Growth Summit is another opportunity, and that will hopefully be a pledging summit. So you'll be hearing more about that in our newsletters, on our website, in our emails as we move forward. There will be a COVID call in September. Gunjan or Sarah, do either of you want to say anything about this call?
Yeah, sure. So we started doing the long-term implications of, adapting to COVID-19 series earlier this year. And at that time, we had asked members and participants in the call about what are the issues that they want to discuss. And mental health, gender-based violence, climate, and food security were the 4 issues that had been flagged. We've already done mental health and food security. Our next call is now going to look at climate. So we are really looking at the intersection of what has the pandemic meant in terms of its environmental footprint, and what are the kind of lessons and adaptations that we have made in that field that we can think of long term. So again, all of you are very welcome to join. Please do join us for the call. And if you have ideas, if this is something you're thinking about, if this is something you would like to be a part of discussing, presenting, or flagging at the discussion on September 15, then please get in touch with Nelly or me. I'm going to put our email IDs in the chat box.
Great, thanks, Gunjan. Okay, I know a number of you attended or watched the recording of a truly extraordinary sectoral dialogue. This is a new initiative for the movement to organize special calls on a special subject and hear the experts in those subjects go on and on about how important community-led development is. You know, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but it's what we've seen in our advocacy with government is it's very important that the sector experts that they talk to, because someone made the point earlier in our call, that the donors are still looking for these short-term silver bullet solutions in one sector. And but there are sector experts in all the sectors that have seen the light, have recognized that it's people power, it's community power, it's collective ownership by communities of these actions that really make the difference. So in September, there will be 3 more of these, and you'll be getting announcements about them in your email as they get scheduled. One on health, one on access to justice, which is a huge equity issue. One of the big barriers to women's full participation in society, and livelihoods. So those will happen in September. And then in October, there will be sector dialogues on education and on climate. Sarah, anything else we want to say about the sector dialogues at this point? If you missed the one on WASH, really you should watch it. It's on the website. I was really impressed to hear these people who've devoted their whole lives to issues of water sanitation and hygiene, how much they valued and had good suggestions for the practice of CLD.
Sean, there's something I want to just add in terms of, Sarah has just put in fact, the dates for the sector dialogues
great.
That we have already planned into the chat box. But I do also want to say that at the end of the sector dialogues, each sector dialogue, we're going to create a position paper on CLD in that sector. The position papers, while they are going to be written by our interns who have actually done a lot of the, they are coordinating the dialogues, they've really gone all out to put them together. We are working with the panelists and all the other experts who are in these dialogues to actually come up with a joint position paper. So I just want to make a pitch that, many of us work in organizations that are huge, which have a lot of sectors that we work across and technical experts. Please share this information with them. We would love to have them involved. We would love for them to be part of our planning of these events, for them to be facilitating these events, moderating them, presenting at these events, and for them to be part of the position papers. So.
Great. Great. Okay, and our next call will be on, as always, the last Wednesday of September. So we'll be able to reflect on all those September events and look forward to the October, November, and December as we get together at the end of this month. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing, and I just want to see if there's any other business, anything else that anyone would like to share before we all say goodbye to each other for another month. Anything?
Just sorry, that's me again speaking, but just to say that we will be having a formal big launch on this research study, and that we will be sharing details soon, but stay tuned, stay posted about that.
Yep, we're looking, this was kind of the maiden voyage of the research findings with family, but we're organizing an event that should reach out far and wide to a lot more people to influence them. And, my takeaway from that research, which was pointed, was the work we all need to do with our own organizations to transform how we write proposals, how we document our work, how we, when I first saw these findings, I knew I created a checklist for our evaluation teams around the world to really, really learn these lessons, because, oftentimes we're responding to donors who really don't care about that. And so we don't write about it. We don't document how long it takes to train a facilitator. What kind of support and acknowledgement do they need? All those factors that are so critical. And I also recognize, listening to today, that some of these things we don't even know how to measure. So I think that this is going to be a high priority for the movement in documenting, sharing the human transformative process of community-led development, and then really advocating with donors to appreciate and to understand it. So these research findings, these recommendations, we should all be taking those to our donors and discussing them with them, because our goals are much bigger than ourselves. We want to transform how the world does development. That means transforming how the donors pay for our work, how communities fund their work. A lot of transformation required here. So with that, I really want to again thank the amazing amount of work that the collaborative research team has done. We'll look forward to seeing those guidance documents popping up on the website soon, so that we can really start to share them with everyone who wasn't able to join us today. And I want to thank all of you who did join us today. We had a good turnout for August. And so thank you all very much. And I'll see you on the Zoom calls. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone, and thank you.
Bye, everyone. Great to see you
Especially
all.
bye to the Liberia chapter. It was great seeing everyone.
Hey, Liberia
Bye.
chapter. All right.
Hey,
take care.
Caroline, like to see you.
Hi.
Bye.
Bye.